Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to another Monuments Monday. This week's topic is going to be, where were Smith's guns? And of course, we're talking about the battery for the 4th New York Independent Artillery, commanded by Captain James Edward Smith. So on July 2nd, this battery of 6 10-pound pear rifles was positioned at the end of General Daniel Edgar Sickles' line of battle, just next to Devil's Den. And the battery was actually ordered here by the brigade commander of the 3rd Corps Artillery, George Randolph. And shortly before the fight, Henry Hunt, who was the chief of artillery for the Union Army, actually came out and talked to James Smith and supervised the placement of the battery. Now, the monument here was dedicated on July 2nd, 1888, at the 25th anniversary of the battle. And a couple interesting things about the monument dedication. One is that there's a photograph where some veterans are in front of the monument during the dedication, and there's a sign here welcoming the Texas troops that returned to the reunion, and also members of the 15th Georgia, men who were in part of the Confederate unit that actually attacked and captured this position. And it got some press around the country. The other thing that is interesting about the monument is that the monument was placed here at this location. At that time, Sickles Avenue was not here, so there was no road here at that time. But at the monument dedication, Brigadier General Henry Hunt, Captain James Edward Smith, and the Association for the 4th New York Independent Battery all condemned the location of the monument, saying it was placed in an incorrect location. And this fact over the years has spurred on the discussion of, well, if the 4 Napoleons of Smith's battery that were atop the hill were not here, where were they? Now, what's really interesting is we have a lot of accounts where people, involved say the monument's in the wrong place and the guns were not there. But we don't have a specific account by someone that tells us where the guns were. So we have to look at all the evidence of the accounts of the men that fought here and around these guns during the battle to try to determine that. One thing you should know, that 4 of Smith's Napoleons were placed atop Devil's Den, and because he did not have room for all 6 guns, a section, or 2 of the guns, was placed in the Plum Run Valley north of Devil's Den to sort of guard the flank of the 3rd Army Corps. And we'll talk about that also. We're on the summit of Houck's Ridge. I should mention that Houck's Ridge, which is called that in early accounts of the battlefield, it's named after John Houck, who was the owner of this property at the time of the battle. He lived on Baltimore Street during the Civil War. But this is where we believe Captain James Smith's guns were actually placed during the fighting. You may know that myself and Gary Edelman wrote a book called Devil's Den, A History and Guide, which was published in 1997. And there's really 4 parts to the book. There's a pre-battle section, which I wrote. There's a battle section, which Gary wrote. There's a post-battle section, which I wrote. And there's a walking tour of Devil's Den, which Gary wrote. Now, of course, in this book, Gary rewrote my section, I rewrote Gary's section, back and forth. So we really shared the book. But, you know, and I'm very proud of some of the things in the book that I came up with. Like, prior to our book being published about the fighting of Devil's Den, maps had showed the 99th Pennsylvania Regiment fighting over in this area, and the 4th Maine Infantry fighting to their left. And I figured out, reading all the accounts, that was not the case, that people had switched those two units on maps. And so, since our book came out and we made a compelling argument, now maps that are published actually show the units the way that I conceived that they fought up here. As well, Gary is very proud of several sections in the book, and one of the things he's most proud of is the location of Smith's guns, because other people prior to us writing our Devil's Den book had come across this account that Smith's guns were not where the monument the monument was located. So I don't know exactly how it happened, but people had jumped to the conclusion that the guns were not there, that the guns were placed out on a low plateau below the summit of Devil's Den and west of Devil's Den. And Gary came to me one day and said, "Hey, I've been reading all these accounts for our battle section, and you know what? These people who put the guns over there are wrong. The guns were on top of the hill." And Gary has an appendix in the Devil's Den book called "Where Were Smith's Guns?" that describes why we believe the guns were up here on the crest instead of down there. And basically the points he brings up is the two sections of Smith's battery were in front of the 124th New York for a while, and in front of the 4th Maine for a while. And it's described that when they're up here on the ridge, that the regiments are just under the brow of the hill behind the guns, just beyond the crest of the hill. According to Smith, here I could not place more than 4 guns on the crest. In rear of this ridge, the ground descended sharply to the east, leaving no room for the limbers on the crest. Therefore, they were posted near as to the guns as the nature of the declivity permitted. And so, from here to the woods is about 60 yards. And, you know, spacing artillery pieces in the Civil War, they're generally placed like 14 yards apart. So this area matches perfectly with that description. And also, if the guns had been placed down there, then there would be plenty of room for the limber chest with the ammunition behind them. And also, I picked up that during the dedication of the 99th Pennsylvania, that one of the people at the address mentioned the desperate effort to recapture Smith's guns during the battle. And they mentioned that the colors at one point rested against one of the guns that was near where the monument was being placed. Of course, having said this, you know that this isn't the original monument that was placed here. In another video we showed that in 1886 there was a previous monument in its location that got moved to another location when this one replaced it in 1889. So you might remember that also. I wanted to mention at this point that if you want to read about Smith's guns in the battery, Captain Smith wrote a book called A Famous Battery, and maybe in its campaigns during the Civil War. And we'll put a link in the description below. You can look at this book on Google Book Search, Advanced Search, and you can read the whole book, or just the Gettysburg section. But the 99th mentions their flag for a time, their colors resting against one of the guns. And also, the 4th Maine is down there in the valley, and early in the fight, they are holding back the advancing Alabamians. And at one point, the colonel of the 4th Maine looks up on top of the hill, and he notices that the Texans and part of the Alabamians had overrun the guns. And you can see the crest of the hill from down there. But if the guns were out on that plateau, there would be no way for the 4th Maine to realize the guns had been captured. And then the 4th Maine ended up pulling back and charging up and driving the Southerners out of the guns. Walker stated that he was able to see the rebels capturing the battery while he was moving along his line in the Valley of Death. And then, of course, we have this very interesting quote by Henry Hunt. So, at the dedication ceremony in 1888, Captain Smith and Henry Hunt were talking about the placement of the guns. And Hunt says to Smith, "Captain, get a painter and have painted upon this rock the fact that your left piece rested within a few feet of it and to the north of this point, and you will have a historical monument located upon the ground occupied by your guns on this ridge." And then he mentions that if Smith would have placed his guns down there, he would have had him arrested for incompetency. Well, first of all, the only way that you can refer to the area where the guns are in the monument as down there is if you're standing up here. And early on, when I read this account, I always imagined that this rock is the one that should have, you know, the X painted on it to mark the location of Smith's guns. This area would be sort of that plateau to the western crest of Halleck's Ridge, which most early people that were writing about this placed Smith's guns. And when I say early, it's not like a lot of people had written about the specifics of the Battle of Devil's Den. The first person that I looked to that really wrote a nice story of Devil's Den was Kathy George, who was the historian at the Gettysburg National Military Park. And you can read her article in Gettysburg Magazine #1. Boy, I don't know what we're at the moment, but I think we're like Gettysburg Magazine #60. But that article had actually previously been published in Morningside's book catalog. They, you know, if you bought books from them, they sent you out a catalog like every 6 months, and then you could go through the newest Civil War books or buy regimental histories in it. And I got the catalog, and I'm going to guess it was around 1986 where this catalog came in. At the beginning of the catalog, they always had an article about a certain aspect of the Civil War, and she wrote an article about the fight for Devil's Den. I think it was called "Our Principal Loss Was in This Place," so you can look for that if you like. She was one of the people that placed Smith's guns along this plateau before we wrote our treatment of the fighting at Devil's Den. So you might want to check that out. It's a really good article.